Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, welcome to the latest episode of the Diversity Minded podcast with myself and my lovely co-host Melisa White. But of course, you might have noticed we have a special guest, Jazz Rasool, a crazy expert in things I absolutely love, and crazy in a good way, by the way. But because we've just had a conversation pre-podcast and we're super jazzed up about it, I do believe we're on episode... Are we 9 now? Which is absolutely insane. But I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves because otherwise I'm just going to butcher it terribly. So, Melisa, you go first.
Well, oh gosh, I didn't know we were going to do an introduction today, but
let's reintroduce ourselves. Tell the people.
Yeah, so I'm Melisa White, and I'm really passionate about the whole aspect of diversity mindedness, being neurodiverse, and not always fitting in. I think that if we look at diversity beyond the visual layer and dive deeper into how we can surround ourselves with people who think and behave differently from us, we will just naturally become better humans. I met Jazz, who I'll introduce to you guys. Super excited about having him on also because he is really here to talk about the harnessing of the energy to follow on from our authenticity conversation last episode. But Jazz, over to you.
Thank you. There's something about neurodiversity that of the recent years I've been looking at, which is how people who are neurodiverse connect into time and connect into space. And that registration with time and space is something that historically I've had a long-standing interest in. My first degree was in physics, and specifically studying astrophysics. So looking at Einstein's theory of relativity on the nature of time and space. But then into quantum physics, I started to get really interested in consciousness. And that's where the dimension of mind came in and how people look at how the mind registers reality. And my master's degree was studying the brain, drugs that work on the brain. And it led me to be asked to teach on mind-body medicine and stress-related disorders all over the world, looking at how the brain influences the immune system, the endocrine system. Eventually, I trained in mind-body medicine as a practitioner myself, training in Eastern martial arts, things like Tai Chi, Qigong, and did that medically. So I really got to understand energy from a Eastern kind of perspective, as opposed to the Western scientific reductionist kind of perspective. And I got involved in how it could help people get the insight they needed to discover and realise their potential through coaching. My former partner was an executive coach, and she's someone who's at the London Business School now. But for a long time I realised a lot of people that were having problems with their lives were having problems because they weren't really managing conservation of energy in their life. And it all came down to how people registered with time, how they had a time registration, how they had a registration with space around them, but also how their registration with the relationship they had with themselves and people around them. And of course, these are things that do come up for people who are neurodiverse. So today, one of the things I really want to talk about is that aspect of energy and how does it shape how we connect into reality around us.
I love that. And I think that speaks to what I think most people call alignment in their lives, where it's energy based, it's what they do every day, things like that. So let's start from a base layer explaining that, because I'm already want to ask 1,000 different questions. Also, if I'm neurodiverse, my place in time, obviously a Time Lord. So thank you for confirming. I'm Doctor Who. But let's explain the basics for the people at home. So can you explain energy alignment? What does it mean, and how does that kind of line up with authentically living as yourself?
Well, let's look at it from two different perspectives. One's a scientific perspective, and the other one's the Eastern traditional indigenous perspective of what energy actually is. In fact, that years ago I was asked to provide a definition of energy when different people all had different ideas what energy actually was. People who were doctors had one idea, people who were physicists had another idea, and people who did healing or teaching, they all had other ideas. But I looked at what was common between them, and I thought the thing that seems to come up a lot is relationship. Whether you're looking at atoms and how they relate with each other, whether you're looking at human beings and how they relate with each other, or even in your own mind, how you look at how two thoughts or feelings relate with one another, it seems that was a common theme. And if you change those relationships, typically you change the energy of that system, whatever it was. So the original definition I gave was really simple. It just simply said that energy is the quantity and quality of relationship. Now, that's the shortest version definition I can give you of energy. But when I expanded it a little bit to make it a bit more robust, I said energy is a quantity and quality of relationship within a system and between that system and others. So it's about what's going on inside of you, but it's also what's going on between you and other people and other things. But then I wanted to make it a bit more practical, because people said, well, exactly what you're talking about in terms of the relationship, what components are you talking about? And I said, well, we're talking about intention, we're talking about attention, and we're talking about your motivation, your will, and how these three things work together. And in addition, I said that these are things that are operating across the dimensions of space, time, and also mind. So the full definition went something like this. It said, energy is a quantity and quality of relationship within a system and between that system and others, applied across the dimensions of space, time, and mind, with intention, attention, and will. That was the full definition.
Yeah.
And you can pretty much bet that it's reversible, like a lot of things in nature, in that if you can say energy is about quantity and quality of relationship, you can reverse that. You can actually say relationships are about the quantity and quality of energy. And if you change relationships, you change energy. If you change energy, you change relationships. And it's universal. Whether you're talking about subatomic particles, molecular reactions in the body, or human beings in society, whenever you change relationships, you change the vibe of the environment. You change the vibe, you change the relationships.
Yeah.
It's really simple, two-way kind of.
And I know everyone's felt that before, but putting that pin on it and then going, that is actually what it is, and bringing in the actual scientific, quantum physicist side of it, that's the really interesting part. I think a lot of people have not thought of it in that realm yet. I mean, what drove you to first connect the dots? Was it you being kind of an astrophysicist, physicist, studying that, but that was your thing? And then was it, the first time you went to a Tai Chi or Qigong class that really was that triggering moment to go, hang on a minute, there's something that connects the East and the West here in terms of their philosophy?
Yeah, there's one key thing I noticed, and what it was about energy, certainly, but it was also how energy was worked with. In fact, Chinese medicine, the discipline of Tai Chi and the associated discipline Qigong. Qigong in Chinese literally means energy work. Okay, so Qi is energy, life force, vital force, and Qigong, I think, and Kung Fu and things like that, it usually means exercise or work. Right. So when you are talking about Qigong, you're talking about the exercise of energy. You're talking about energy exercise. And I was training in martial arts only after I trained as a gym instructor. And one of the things I noticed about people in the West was, and this puzzled people who are Chinese, they said, I don't understand why you would do exercise where you were more exhausted at the end than you were at the beginning. Why would you not do an exercise which actually cultivated your energy, so you had more energy at the end than you did at the beginning? And Qigong, Tai Chi, things like that, yoga, when they're worked with properly, that's what they do. You end up at the end with more energy and aliveness than you did at the beginning. And surely that's what a sensible kind of exercise to do. Who wants to exercise with absolutely knackered and exhausted by the end? You're not going to be incentivized to do that.
100%. I know everyone's been there, right? So the standard is you're supposed to go to the gym or go for a run or whatever it is, but everyone's done that type of exercise that just makes them want to stop immediately, and they're just like, oh, well, this sucks. If you don't like something, it doesn't give you that energy. It's that what fits the energy or alignment you're on. And there's a creator I follow, you might be familiar, called Dr. K, who's absolutely incredible on YouTube. Dr. K he went to medical school, was a doctor, had all of that, became a little bit disillusioned with it, and became a monk for like a few years and studied at a monastery, and really learned kind of more Eastern ways of things, and went back to his own roots because he was from Indian heritage. And now he has this incredible Twitch and YouTube channel talking about all of this stuff and helping people with their problems as much as he humanly can, mixing the kind of Western approach and Eastern approach. And he explained the difference to me, not to me personally, on a video really well. He was like, the Western approach is obviously mass application, so it's test something over and over again. Freeze. There you go. I'm back now. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. So yeah, test things over and over again. Is it replicable in a lab? If so, tick, you can apply that to the mass. The Eastern approach tends to be much more individualistic in terms of how every person is treated differently in terms of starting from ground zero. So it's hard to apply on mass, but actually it seems to be much more effective when someone experiences that. And that's what it kind of reminds me of. That energy work is down to the individual.
This is
right?
inside out. It's the world to the individual versus the individual out to the world. There's two different perspectives, but actually they're not exclusive. They're meant to, in Chinese medicine, these kind of ideas, they're very complementary. It's the idea of masculine and feminine, of yin and yang, dark and light. They're not meant to be worked with in isolation. They're meant to be worked with together. And only when you get the balance right between the two of them, and when I say balance, I don't mean equality. I mean, they have to be in the right proportion to each other for what it is that you're trying to do. And if you get things into the right proportion, then you typically get conservation of energy. You typically get things to be sustainable. They live longer. They've got more time to grow and evolve. So there's all these possibilities that emerge once you get things in proportion. And unfortunately, in the West, having studied Western psychology and medicine, one of the things I noticed was, especially with coaching, people are very goal-oriented in the West. And then they think about the process of achieving that goal as a secondary thing. They define the goal first, and then they go and try and achieve it. Now, if they don't have the resources or the energy to achieve it, they never achieve the goal, right? In the East, it tends to be the other way around. They spend a lot of time accumulating energy and resources, but the danger with that is that if they don't make use of that energy, by the time they do, things that they've accumulated or acquired may have reached an expiry date, and they can't actually channel it into a goal. It's too late. So there needs to be a kind of harmony of the two. You need to find a way of getting goals and energies to work together at the same time. So the work that I've done over the last 20 years or so has been about uniting that Western and Eastern approach by not being goal-oriented or energy-oriented, but actually looking at how goals and energies can work together in a live way in the moment, on the day.
Wow, interesting. I mean, Melissa, what do you think?
Well, all of this Chinese information that I'm just learning, and I'm half Chinese, so I should be. This is really relevant. Although I love yoga, and I always feel extremely balanced and aligned and energized afterwards. But I was going to say, so what are some of the ways that people can begin aligning their energy? So we're talking about how do we achieve better alignment so we can show up more authentically? That's the purpose, right? To ultimately live more fulfilling, happy lives. I don't know, that's my goal. But what are some practical ways that people can begin aligning their energy?
Well, the science and also the practice of working with energy from Eastern traditions, everything seems to be based on the idea of working through your center. Okay, so if you're doing Tai Chi, you start your movement by, connecting into your center. And when you move, you're moving your center and your body's following with it, right? And when you work through your center, that applies not just to your body, but you can do that with your mind. You can do that with your heart. You can find the center of your mind. You can find the center of your feelings. And if you position yourself in those places as you live your life, as you have your exchanges with people would often look at you and describe you as someone who's pretty centered. And when you're not quite right, people would describe you as being a bit off-center, right? So it's a principle, it's there, it's buried in the consciousness of society, but people don't connect into it properly. In physics, the principle is something that comes out through the idea of center of gravity, for example, right? And if I have this set of headphones I've got here, this is difficult to find out where the center of gravity of this thing is. If I can find out where it is and I can hold it just underneath that position, the whole thing will stabilize. But if I try and hold it anywhere else, it becomes unstable. So the principle in physics which says if you support something at its center of energy or center of gravity, you can stabilize it. But this often gets interpreted in terms of people talking about conservation of energy and following the path of least resistance and things like this. What I discovered was the two things that were really important was, first of all, find the center of energy, work with that. And the next thing to do is not follow the path of least resistance in life, but actually be the form of least resistance. And it's a bit like looking at a hedgehog. It's not very aerodynamic. It's not very streamlined. You throw that in the air, and I'm not suggesting people do, I'm just sort of pointing out something. It's going to experience a lot of turbulence. It's going to experience a lot of loss of energy. But on the other hand, an egg, you throw that through the air, it's going to experience a lot less turbulence because of its shape, its form. And it doesn't matter whether you push that egg through air or water or treacle, you'll always experience the least resistance for the shape that it's in. So the first port of call for a lot of people, and this lines directly to being authentic, because when you are the form of least resistance, then it doesn't matter what path you follow in life, you're always going to conserve energy the best compared to someone that isn't. And that means someone who's being authentic, that's the form of least resistance in life. If you're being authentic, you don't need to pretend to be something else and put all this energy into stuff that's not really helpful for you to move through your life.
But when you say find your center, is that find your why? Is it your purpose? Is it what aligns with your natural strengths? How does somebody find their center?
It's about the center of who you're being on a given day. Okay, so who you're being on a given day, it kind of depends on what you're doing. It kind of depends on how you're doing things. It kind of depends on who you're doing things with. All right. And if you triangulate those three things, in the middle, you will find what you just said is your why that day. And that is your center of gravity in terms of your activities that you're doing in your life. But that's not necessarily the center of gravity of who you are being as a person. Okay. Who you're being as a person, it's really something that you'll find is a matter of what's going on between your personality, what's going on deeper down within you in terms of your character, in terms of your soul, your spirit, that kind of stuff. But more importantly, it tends to be all mediated by what's going on in between. All right. And that's usually your ego. Your ego kind of is like the traffic cop between your character and your personality. And if it misdirects, then the personality gets the wrong impression of who you are, and that gets expressed out into the world. But it can convey the wrong impression of the world back into your character. And therefore you get this wrong impression of how the world is. And it's all down to the ego. The ego exaggerates things or it undermines things. And this is what leads to the issues of low self-esteem or people being narcissistic and overly confident and arrogant in what they're doing. But when they're really true to themselves and ego is doing its job as a lens to properly project character into personality in the world back to the character, then you get this situation where the personality is aligned to the character. And there's that alignment, energy moves through that with a minimum of resistance. And it's all about not pretending to be something that you're not. And if you're genuinely in alignment, even though you're feeling vulnerable, you have the courage to still do that and hold that space within you, then typically you find that any energy that you use to do anything, thinking, feeling, doing, it doesn't go through a strange, twisted journey in order for it to be worked with, because it's a straight path between personality that people see and the character who you deeply are deep down within you. So that alignment's really, really important.
I can see that would probably take more practice than people think. In terms of probably starting with mindfulness practices, maybe some meditation, because a lot of people have not started in.
Oops.
Because the internet. Am I back now for everybody here? Cool. Yes. My internet's being strange today. But yeah, I can assume that's going to take a lot of practice. A lot of people haven't started an inward journey for themselves yet. So are there any extremely beginner tips to go, right, just take 5 minutes, quiet room, hands together? Like, is it as simple as that?
But before that, because I know that the intention, attention, will thing that you mentioned, I don't know if it leads into that, Jazz, but
it does.
I definitely, okay, perfect, because that was like, sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to do this in 3 steps. The most basic, simple thing I've had to explain to people about how to make a change in their lives and transform themselves. I said, look, on any given moment, when my clients have come to see me, I've noticed that the reason why they've come to see me is because they've done something where they've done more of something when they should have done less. They did less of something that they should have done more of. And they interfered with something they should have left alone. Or they failed to interfere with something and instead just ignored it. So the most basic things really are down to people understanding what it is do you need to do more of? What is it do you need to do less of? And what is it you shouldn't be interfering with because it's not broken, doesn't need fixing? Now that sounds like a really simple thing, but actually identifying what it is that you're meant to do more of, what it is that you're meant to do less of, and what you're meant to leave alone, that's really hard for a lot of people. And the biggest challenges come up when people mix those things up. They were supposed to do more of something, but they did less. They're supposed to do less of something, but they did more of it. And they were not meant to interfere with something, but they stuck their nose in and they decided to interfere. And this is when people get into problems, right? So that initial way of looking at things is very, very simple. But in terms of actually identifying what it is you're meant to do more of, what it is you're meant to do less of, and what you're meant to leave alone, you can look at it from three perspectives. Those three perspectives are, what do you need to get more support for in your life? What do you need to reinforce? Okay. Secondly, what is it that you need to actually change and challenge yourself on, stretch yourself on? Okay, go beyond what you've been doing traditionally that's worked, but now you're discovering that the way that you did things no longer work. They've reached their expiry date. You need to try a different, way of doing things. So the second thing is understanding where to challenge yourself. Okay. The third is understanding which of those things to work with at any given time. When do you need support? When do you need challenge? And you might need to have both. There are some areas you might need to support yourself with, and other areas you might need to challenge. And that's all about reflection. It's all about taking stock. So these three things, support, challenge, and reflection, are like vitamins. You need to get your 3 a day. When you don't get support, challenge, and reflection at the right times, then just like vitamins, if you don't get vitamins for a day or two, it's not a big deal. But if you didn't get support for a year, like if you didn't get vitamin C for a year, that's going to cause a pathology. People who've never been challenged in their lives, people who spend decades before taking stock and stopping to reflect, these all have consequences of growth. But if you get your 3 a day, if you get your support, challenge, and reflection in the right doses, from the right sources each day, then you will grow. But how do you do that? How do you know what kind of support you need to get, what kind of challenge, and where you should be reflecting on things in order for you to grow? And this goes into the things that Melisa was just talking about now. The mechanics of it are all to do with the intentions that you have for your life and for people around you and the world, the attention you pay to those intentions, and the sustainability of that attention that you pay to your intentions through the willpower, the motivation that you've got. If your ability to act on things, your agency, is not available to you because you've got will, but you've got no power behind it, okay? You may have will, but it's not free to act, okay? Then you're going to discover that you can't pay attention to your intentions long enough for them to actually manifest into the world. So those 3 steps were find out what to do more of, less of, and leave alone. Make sure you then get support for the right areas, challenge and stretch yourself in the right areas, and make sure you're reflecting enough. And you need to do these things in the right doses at the right times, not just with yourself, but also with other people. But it's all going to hinge on your intentions and how you pay attention to them, and how you keep that going through your motivation and through your will. Now, here's the thing. If your will is not free, many people think they've got free will to do things, right? If your will is not free, and in most cases people's will is actually not free will, because their energy is locked into dealing with crap from their past. Energy is locked into dreaming about their future and worrying about their future. Their energy is locked into dealing with distractions in the current moment, which aren't their real priorities. Now, when you've got 80% of your energy disassociated from the current moment, then it gives you only like 10-20% capability of responding and acting on what's right in front of you. Your will isn't free at all. It's 80% obliged, imprisoned. So that's the most critical thing. Free your will, then you can pay attention to your intentions. Then you can support yourself, challenge yourself, reflect in the way that you need to, and do more of things, less of things, and leave things alone. Conserving your energy and being able to actually achieve what you're trying to do.
And just on that as well, from a neurodivergent perspective, to bring it back to that, so I'm already thinking in my ADHD line of thinking, right? This is either a massive superpower for us or one of the hardest things to do. And it's probably both simultaneously at the same time, if I had to take a guess, right? Because our ability to hyper focus on any particular interest is either keeping us in that moment or keeping us very far away, depending on how far away the goal hyper obsession is. Let's say if it's, I want to build £1 billion tech company, then you're so far away in the future that you can't focus on the now. But if your hyper obsession is currently building my train set, that's then immediately, you're in the moment, you're aligned with what you're enjoying. So I can imagine it's very different depending on the mind that's experiencing it.
So how you anchor yourself in time, how you register with time, how you calibrate time, and how you work with all of these things in conjunction also with your registration of what's going on in the space around you, how you read the room, and these kind of registrations, they're fundamental to really just simply registering reality, because reality is made of time and space and our consciousness and experience of it. So if a person is neurodiverse, or even a person who's neurotypical or neurospicy, as some people like to now also refer to, if they have problems with time registration, they have problems with space registration or relational registration relative to other people, typically they will be classed as neurodiverse. But if everything that they're doing actually works for them, then actually the people who are typically considered neurotypical, they're the abnormal ones, in that situation.
Yeah.
I just wanted to touch on, last year I worked with a company that was using EEGs to track changes in brain waves with mindset management training. And the entire purpose, and I want to draw the correlation because, as you said, James, like wanting to build the big tech company, well, they may be so distracted and hyper-focused on that they miss opportunities that come into their present day on a regular basis. And then I also wanted to draw an alignment to a lot of the social media that's talking about the political landscape at the moment. So if that's not something we can physically change ourselves, then would that be one of the things that you think, actually, let's just leave our nose out of it because that's not doing anything for my core alignment or center of being? Like if I'm going out there and I'm ranting and talking about things that I cannot change or affect change on, is my energy better spent focusing on what truly matters to me and driving change within my little universe?
When you drop a pebble into the middle of a lake, it sends ripples outwards. Every time you place an intention in the universe, in yourself or in the world around you, it sends ripples outwards. All right? It actually does it in both directions. It sends ripples inwards to you, but it also sends ripples outwards. Okay? Now, when those ripples hit the bank of a lake or the river, whatever, they bounce back and they head back in the direction they came from. All right? And they carry with them information about where they came from. And you will pick that up as some kind of signal. It'll come up because things seem to come together in space or time and register in your mind. And when these things come together in space and time, they come together in one of two ways. If things come together in time, that's normally associated with chronicity or anything to do with time, is a chronometer or things like that. But typically, when two things come together in time, there's a synthesis of their points in time. It's actually called synchronizing, right? But we would experience that as something that typically people regard as a synchronicity, okay? But when things come together in space, they coincide, right? And we would typically call that a coincidence. Now, when you have something come together at the same place and the same time, when you have a synchronicity and coincidence happen together, that's what people call serendipity. All right. And there's a weird thing that when you free your will, and also actually when you use your will 100% and you don't go into anything half-hearted, all right, you're always doing things with 100% of your will and 100% of free will, then an unusual thing actually starts to happen. You actually find that you have this freedom that you didn't have before. It's to do with the most fundamental law of the universe, which is the law of conservation of energy. If you make the best use of your energy and you don't waste it, an example of that is being 100% fully applying yourself to something in terms of your whole heart. You're not half-hearted about it, right? You're fully aligned and you're committed. That's the best act of conservation of energy there is. And there's a physics to it which says the universe looks at anything that does that and it tends to make way for it. It tends to actually give it more freedom to actually act. So there's an unusual thing that happens that when you act on yourself, it has ripple effects on the outside world. And you might think, okay, if I want to change the world, I've got to help refugees in this country and I've got to work with the political process and do this. And I've done both those things. Part of my work historically has been working in refugee camps in Syria and in Jordan, working with Syrian and Gaza refugee camps, but also here in the UK, working with politically machinery to influence policy around education and things. But you know what? I don't think I would have been able to do any of that if I hadn't planted the intention first within myself and paid attention to it consistently with all my heart and not in a half-hearted way. And that kind of action, it seems to generate those ripple effects. And eventually, one day, you find yourself sitting in the House of Parliament talking to a minister of the government. One day, you find yourself helping refugees in Jordan. Another time, you might be in the Arctic helping aircraft engineers or astronaut trainers in Italy, for example. And I do laugh sometimes. I think, how did I get into this situation? How did I get here with these people? And I know it's because I planted an intention. I paid attention to it. And I kept my will and motivation applied to it without being distracted from stuff from my past, stuff to do with the future, or stuff around me in the moment. And that resoluteness is what generates ripple effects that change everything, beyond you slowly. It does happen. You find yourself in situations of strange synchronicity and coincidence and serendipity. And other people look at that typically and they think you're just lucky. You're not. You generate alignment in the universe because you generate alignment in yourself. So that's
I think a lot of people would commonly refer to that, I guess, as manifest destiny. Is that right to say, in terms of that?
But there's an engineering to it. It's not random. It's not luck. It can be engineered.
Yeah, it's just whole focus on the goal. And I've been in both places where I've been solely focused on what I feel is my current alignment at the time. But then I've also been in what I call the pit of bottomless despair. Someone with ADHD with no goal. That is like the worst thing on earth. It's like human torture to me, right? For those people who are lost and don't even know where to start, they don't have an inkling of any particular thing, or especially sort of those struggling with depression, that motivation is really hard to find in anything, just to get out of bed. So when you're at that place of complete zero, no motivation, nothing sparks anywhere, no light. Where do we start in terms of setting off that first flame?
Well, there's two ways to look at it. One, somebody's mentioned to me quite often about seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, for example. All right. And I've said, well, when the light goes out, what do? You're in darkness. And, well, you do the obvious. You create your own light. And then it doesn't matter how dark things get. You're always going to be in a state of illumination. You're also going to be able to illuminate what's around you for the benefit not just of yourself, but also other people. Now, the way that you create your own light, and you can look at this from a spiritual perspective, or you can look at it from a self-actualization perspective in Western, psychology and mindfulness and cognitive therapy, those kind of things. The way you create your own light, the beginnings of it come from, first of all, ensuring your will is free to act on things, that your attention is not being distracted, and that your intentions are well formed. If you have a fuzzy intention, then something fuzzy is what's going to get manifested, right? But a lot of it seems to be linked, from my experience, it seems to be linked to people's life lessons. Now, most people know something's happened and they haven't learned their lesson, and the same thing keeps happening over and over again, right? It could be in relationships, it could be in work, it could be in life. But I noticed something really interesting. The people who did actually learn their life lessons and applied them, there's something about them. There's something about their energy. There's something about their gravitas. There's something about their presence and the way other people approach them. Because these are people who are actually have applied their attention and will to not make the same mistakes over and over again. And once they've learned life lessons, the life for them, you'd think, could get easier, right? But it doesn't. Actually, they start experiencing harder and harder things. But they become more and more accomplished because they're doing things that are harder and harder. It's like going to the gym. If I just said, well, my favorite weight is 10 kilograms, and that's what I like working with all the time, all right? I'd never really grow any muscles beyond a certain point. At some point, I have to increase the weight, right? Or increase the reps to improve my performance. And I learned from one of my masters. He said, if things are getting easier in your life, you're going in the wrong direction as far as growth is concerned. If growth is about working with tougher and tougher challenges. But if you haven't learned the easier ones first, the smaller life lessons, you're not going to be able to deal with the bigger ones, right? And it turns out the people who have dealt with the smaller life lessons, they're capable of working with the bigger life lessons, and they're more capable of helping others with their life lessons as a consequence as well. And everything, all the synchronicity, coincidence, serendipity, how the stars align and, you know, things like that happen, they tend to happen more for people who've learned their life lessons and put what they've learned into action. The ones that haven't, they keep making the same mistakes over and over again. They actually go and actually violate the law of conservation of energy, and the universe does not smile on them. It just does not smile on them.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say in terms of, you can apply this to relationships, like you said. So I've got girlfriends and they keep having the same kind of partner, and you're like, well, clearly the universe is trying to teach you a lesson that you're still not listening to. And I know that that's not, but even in a work situation, if you keep encountering the same boss, how are you building yourself up to handle that in a better way that's more constructive and conducive?
There's a mechanics to it. And it's very, very simple. Most people are of the belief that in order for them to become someone or have a certain life, they need to add certain things into their life, and they need to get rid of certain things in their life. It's a maths game, really, where you are the sum of everything you've ever added into your life and everything you've let go of, and also what you've decided to keep, right? Those three things: it's addition, subtraction, and just maintenance. It's simple maths. It really is, right? But the problem is a lot of people add things into their life that are not really right for them. They support themselves when they should have challenged themselves. They challenge themselves when they should have supported themselves. They rush into action without having spent time in reflection, or they spend too much time in reflection, overthink things, and don't act quickly enough. And that's bad maths, right? But this is an illusion. This is a misconception. If you add things into your life and take things away, then you'd hope that you'd sum up into something, right? But the reality is it's the other way around. Who you are choosing to be in a given moment through your free will, intention and attention, who you are choosing to be determines what gets added to your life, what comes in, and what leaves, right? It's not the other way around. It's not a case of what you add and what you subtract leads you to become who you are. It's a case of choose who you are going to become, choose who you need to be, and you will find the forces around you in the universe will naturally lead to certain things getting added into your life and other things being taken out. It's a game of attraction and repulsion, right? It's just natural forces that are only being put into motion as a consequence of the choice you've made about who you want to be. So start with there. Start with the choice of who you want to be clear about the intentions associated with who you're going to be, the attention that you need to pay to that, and the motivation and will you need to keep it all going, and you will find things get added into your life and things will leave according to natural magnetic kind of forces, you know. So there's more than one law at work in the universe. You know, the universe doesn't just run on gravity. It runs on electricity. It runs on magnetism. It runs on nuclear forces. So it's important to bear in mind that you have to work with all the forces. Don't try and think just working with one is going to make everything turn around. Especially the myth of working with, for example, the law of attraction. If you work with the law of attraction, but you don't work with the law of repulsion, that's not going to work, because you're going to end up with lots of things in your life that you're trying to get rid of, but they just seem to sit there and won't go away. And you're wondering why you're not being able to attract things in, because your life is too already occupied with stuff.
Yeah. And
it does require you to work with more than just one law in the universe.
Yeah, and I do find it fascinating how like other old adages have appeared in like the formula you're putting out. So I immediately think fake it till you make it is being around for ages, but actually that ties into one of the laws that is being applied to the universe, right? Like being manifest who you are. And I suppose it kind of
it's a whole conversation about authenticity.
Yeah.
If you align what is true within you, then that's what will become true. If you align to what's fake in you, then that's what will become fake in you and fake in the world. It's a simple principle, but it's amazing how often people choose to pretend to be somebody else other than who they truly are. And that costs so much more energy to do that. It doesn't respect conservation of energy. And in the end, if there's a person in the universe who is respecting conservation of energy by being true and authentic with themselves, and someone who isn't, typically the person who's respecting conservation of energy will get the advantage. And that's really important to recognize.
I love, oh my God, I feel like because I think that everybody's going to want like a follow-up to this with all of their questions added. But do you have any final tips on the whole alignment, authenticity, happiness, and how you don't have to be, I think the entire premise of this is we don't want to be walking around and meeting people that are exactly like us. The benefit is the mix of everybody in their individuality, not trying to fit into little boxes.
Each person's mix of intention, attention, and will is unique. It's like a fingerprint. And it determines the energetic impression they make on the universe around them and within them too, right? And I'll finish by just sharing one story, which goes back to when I was homeless for a while. I was homeless for 3 months. And the first night, it was February 23rd, 2008. I was freezing cold here in London. I was sleeping behind some garbage cans. And this is something I talk about in my TED talk that I did a few years ago, that you can check out on the TED platform. And I found myself in this situation, and I didn't really know if I was going to be alive in the morning because it's so cold and freezing, and I just had my coat and I was sleeping on my rucksack. And I came face to face with the truth. And this is the interesting thing, that when you lose everything on the outside, you're still left with this thing on the inside that's the truth. You can't get away from it. You have to face it. And one of the things I realized was that I didn't want what was inside of me to go to waste. I didn't want to die without what was inside of me having made a positive difference to the world. And I wasn't a religious person, but I said to God at the time, I said, don't let me die without these things of having had a chance to make a difference in the world. I was lucky. I woke up in the morning and I went on to actually start making a difference with those things in the world. But the lesson I learned was this comes from at least 6 or 7 occasions where I've nearly been killed in my life. Knife situations, gun situations, car accidents. There's been a few occasions where I've been brought very, very close to death. And there's an interesting thing that happens when you get close to death repeatedly. You either think you're really, really clumsy, or you think someone's trying to give you a message. You know, in my case, I looked at it from the perspective of, if I'm going to die, what's worth dying for? And it's weird that when you discover what it is that you're prepared to die for, you actually discover what it is that you're meant to be living for. And it's a really, really important lesson. But the challenge is that when you're brought into that situation of harm to yourself, the question that comes up is this, that it's a question of compassion. And you can tell yourself the truth about life and the world in a way, or somebody else could tell you in a way that depresses you. It's true, but the way it was said, it leads you to feel demoralized and disenchanted. It might want you to lead you to slash your wrists, and self-harm and, beat yourself up over things. Now, the Tibetans look at compassion as the most powerful force in the universe, because when you work with compassion in a true sense, here's what it does. It enables you to work with the truth in a way that brings you to life. And that's really important. If you can't work with the truth in a way that brings you to life, you're not being compassionate to yourself. Okay? You're actually abusing yourself. You're in a state of violence towards yourself. And of course, from a compassion perspective, that's the worst crime that you could possibly commit against yourself. And also for the benefit of the world too, right? So my biggest lesson, probably the one that will catapult people if they really engage with it, is by all means, first of all, discover the truth and build your intentions, attentions and will around it, but work with it in a way that brings you to life. If it isn't bringing you to life, you're not being compassionate in the way that you are working with it. In fact, you're not conserving energy in a way that benefits you and the whole of the universe, right? So compassion is absolutely central to engaging with the truth in a way that brings you to life. And so long as you're being brought to life and not being taken down a road towards death, then you can be in service to the universe, to the world around you, and you can make an actual difference, in the world. But it comes from being compassionate in a way that's going to bring the truth to life for you and bring you to life. Incredible. That's not an easy thing to do, but it does boil down to doing the right things at the right time in terms of support, challenge and reflection through your intention, attention and your will. So the instruction's simple: to be compassionate and work with the truth in a way that brings you to life. But the mechanics of it, obviously, there's a little bit more sophistication to that.
Yeah. And,
right. And oh, sorry, James.
I was just saying, we've gone through it a hell of a lot. We're definitely going to have to do a follow-up
Another
episode
one.
on this, right?
And if anybody wants to reach out to Jazz directly, I mean, obviously you're on LinkedIn, but what's the name of your company? Yeah,
if you go to energydiamond.com, you'll see there's a contact page there that you can connect to me on. But yeah, you can connect to me through linkedin.com/Jazz Rasool, and you'll find me there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I mean,
Jazz, this was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And if anybody has any questions or would like a follow-up session with questions and answers from Jazz, please let us know. We really appreciate your time and your energy and focusing your attention here today. Thank you.
You might notice that I was kind of being brought to life by all of this. So obviously this was a very compassionate event that worked with the truth in the right kind of way.
Yeah.
Podcasts are great.
I feel it. Yeah.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks, Melissa, for creating the space to hold this kind of conversation.
Yep,
let's hope it helps the world. So everyone follow, like, share, all of that. Let's distribute it, make sure more people can get aligned. But we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.